Hi guys, so we're going to be doing a presentation on the ethical and legal implications of genetic testing and modification. My name's Alexis, and I'm working with Cerise and Hunter. Um, so just for a little introduction about what is genetic testing. Genetic testing involves analyzing DNA to identify genetic disorders, predispositions to diseases, or personal traits in general. And in this presentation, we're exploring the moral and ethical questions that come with it, and some of the legal limitations also. So, some questions you can start thinking about as a pre-law community are, should genetic evidence be permissible in court? How might genetic testing influence future legal standards for privacy, health rights, and discrimination? And is our legal framework prepared for the genetic testing revolution?
So I'm going to be talking about CRISPR as an example. CRISPR-Cas9 is a gene editing tool that's used to cut DNA at specific locations, and it's used for genomic research, among other things. And there are two main components to the system, which is DNA cutting protein called Cas9 and RNA molecule called the guide molecule. And these two work together to form a complicated system that can cut specific parts of the DNA and alter it. And so while CRISPR-Cas9 offers really incredible opportunities, including the ability to cure sickle cell disease, just as one example, it also raises some serious ethical and legal questions. On the ethical side, CRISPR therapies are very expensive as new technology, and it can be too expensive for a lot of low-income patients or just for a majority of the population who can't afford it. Infrastructure gaps also make it unreachable in countries that are most affected by genetic diseases. Also, editing for traits like intelligence risk treating children as designer products and designer babies. And so the idea of designer babies is pretty controversial because it exacerbates inequality as people who can afford um, CRISPR therapies can choose more desirable traits for their children. And then there's also the ethical concern of consent because future children can't really consent to changes and edits that's being made to their DNA. On the legal side, CRISPR's potential for creating biological threats raises concerns because many countries lack specific regulations, so it limits enforcement options. Um, Also, genome editing activities fall under disparate legal regimes, such as health, agriculture, and environmental protection. And so, as a result, the jurisdiction is kind of unclear, and the boundaries. So, it kind of complicates law enforcement's ability to monitor and to police CRISPR applications effectively. And so, over 2 dozen countries ban heritable genome modifications and impose licensing for clinical use. Um, and there's uneven international legislation, especially with the rise of DIY kits and accessibility of gene editing tools. And so this kind of undermines the uniform enforcement and policing of these prohibitions.
Yes, so another example of something to talk about within this discussion is the Dor Yeshurim program, which works to prevent the Tay-Sachs disease in Ashkenazi Jews. The Tay-Sachs disease is like a highly heritable genetic disease that is life-threatening and really debilitating and devastated families within the Ashkenazi Jew community. And the purpose of the Dor Yeshurim program is to do premarital community-based voluntary carrier screening for selected autosomal recessive disorders. Um, and so this basically means like couples who are planning on getting married can do this testing and see if their future offspring would carry the Tay-Sachs genes. So the scope is Tay-Sachs and other disorders prevalent in Ashkenazi Jew communities. And the process is an anonymous ID system. So participants submit samples and they receive match or no match results. Um, but it's again not individualized. So yeah, the key feature is that there's no disclosure of individual carrier status, only compatibility information. Yeah. So some of the legal implications are that it operates outside traditional medical channels. So it's not bound by the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, um, which basically means that they refuse to share individual genetic data, which could leave physicians without critical information for clinical decision making. But this is again in order to protect privacy. So some of the ethical concerns are autonomy versus communal benefit, where like working to balance individual reproductive choice against the communal goal of reducing Tay-Sachs. And there's also stigmatization concerns where the concealment of carrier status can perpetuate stigma around genetic disease because if they're told that you're not supposed to share that, or you're not supposed to know about it, that kind of gives the message that being a carrier is a very negative thing. Yeah.
All right, so a keystone piece of modern legislation in genetic testing would be the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which protects individuals from discrimination in health insurance and employment. So, what constitutes genetic information? It would be the results of genetic tests, either your own or those from your family members, as well as family medical genetic history. And the primary intention of GINA was to encourage people to get genetic testing for inherited diseases without fear of negative consequences from these organizations. So, as we'll see on the next slide, it's important to consider what GINA protects and what it doesn't protect. So, as I said, health insurance and employment. Eligibility and premium rates and denying coverage or increasing costs, you cannot use genetic information to do that. And likewise, for employment, you cannot hire or fire or give promotions based on genetic information. However, there are specific things that GINA doesn't protect, as we'll see in the next slide. Specifically, life insurance, disability insurance, and long-term care insurance, because these insurers need this genetic information to make informed coverage decisions, as well as already manifested conditions. Because once a disease is diagnosed and, for example, it impairs your ability to do a job, then that could be used against you, as we'll see in the next slide. So an interesting example would be Huntington's disease. Oh yeah, just go to the next slide. So it's a severe neurological disorder that, interestingly enough, occurs or the onset of the disease itself doesn't occur until 30 to 50. So suppose I get genetic testing and I test positive for the mutation, but I'm not yet showing symptoms. Then Gina is going to protect me from health insurers or employers abusing this information. But suppose 2 decades later, in my 40s, I develop clear neurological symptoms and I'm clinically diagnosed with the disease. Then at this point, the condition has manifested and an employer could fire me due to poor performance stemming from my neurological degeneration. And in order for me to put a case against this, I would need to prove it's a disability-related discrimination under the Americans Disability Act, which would be a difficult legal burden if I'm neurologically impaired.
Now we're going to share a Google form with some critical questions that will hopefully make you think about the intersection of legal limitations and ethical concerns with genetic testing and modification to hopefully get a sense of where you stand on the emerging technology of genetic modification and testing. Thank you.